Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Israel Brief brought to you by Lay of the Land. I'm Rolene Marks, bringing you the top stories from Israel and the region this week, only Tuesday to Thursday. But without further ado, let's take a look at those top stories, and we begin with the COVID-19 crisis in Israel. The Knesset, which is Israel's parliament, took a vote last night, quite a controversial vote, which was to not outrightly ban protests, but to severely limit the amount of protesters. One of the big criticisms of late with respect to the spread of the virus has been that many people have been allowed the freedom to protest while we are supposed to be in lockdown. So now, as per the new regulations, only 20 people will be allowed to protest at a time, and protesters and activists have taken their case to Israel's High Court. And Prime Minister Netanyahu said it is likely that the lockdown period could exceed that of 3 weeks, that we could go for a month or longer, or until at least 75% of infections have come down. So we really hope to see a dramatic drop in the amount of daily infections and the mortality rate, because we really want to get Israel back working and back functioning. And yesterday, as I mentioned, we have the dubious honor of surpassing the United States as far as mortality is concerned, with more people dead per capita than the USA. And our seriously ill have topped 800, which is really putting the strain on our healthcare system. But also the question is, how do we deal with giving adequate care or helping children who have tested COVID positive? Now, we know that schools will not open after this lockdown period, but for those kids who have tested COVID positive and are in a serious condition, what is being done to try and help ease them through this time? And what medical professionals are doing is dressing up as clowns, even though they are wearing their hazmat or PPE protection outfits. This is just to try and lighten the burden and lighten the extreme strain on the mental health of children. So those are your top headlines with regards to COVID. But now we look at an event that all Israelis anticipate. It takes place every year. All world leaders that are member states of the United Nations participate, and that is speeches at the UN General Assembly. Last night was Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, his chance to address the UNGA, and he's always one of the highly anticipated speakers. It's often thought or felt here in Israel that whether you are pro-Netanyahu or anti-Netanyahu, one thing we all agree on is that the United Nations is his real house, and nobody knows how to speak or how to bring a prop more than the Prime Minister. So let's unpack some of the details he spoke about during his speech. The Prime Minister addressed the recent normalization deals and thanked President Trump for bringing them. He says, it's not often that Arabs and Israelis agree, but this is what we agree on. He also addressed the Palestinians and said no longer would the Palestinians have veto over how peace is made in the region, but did say that he is prepared to meet with the Palestinians and negotiate peace on the Trump peace plan conditions. And just before he spoke, it was anticipated that he would reveal some information with regards to Hezbollah. Well, the Prime Minister addressed the recent bomb blast that took place in Beirut just several weeks ago. This was as a result of Hezbollah, a terror organization that is sponsored by Iran, which is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Their stockpile of ammonium and explosives blew up in the port area of Beirut, and the damage was absolutely devastating. Well, the Prime Minister showed with visuals where the other stockpile is, and apart from being very close to the airport in Beirut, he showed exact meticulous coordinates of how close it was to gas canisters, gas stations, and said that there would be a tremendous impact and tragedy if something had to happen, and appealed to the Lebanese people to please start protesting. He also addressed the people of Lebanon, saying Israel has no issue with the Lebanese people. We mean you no harm, but the real issue is Hezbollah, and it's time to kick them out the country. He also spoke about the threat Iran continues to pose to the region, saying they are enriching uranium, plutonium. They have the IR-9 missile that he says, which is stated or is part of a nuclear program. And he said that he may have stood alone when it came to the Iranian deal, but more and more countries are opening their eyes and seeing the issue that Iran poses, and thanked the United States for reintroducing sanctions on Iran. He also excoriated the UN Security Council. He said that they know that Iran has flouted the terms of the condition and have done absolutely nothing, and appealed to world powers to stand with the USA and to stand with Israel with the fight against Iran. And he said again that when Arabs and Israelis unite and they talk to you about the threat posed by Iran, it is time to listen. And that was the Prime Minister's speech. It has been extremely well received here in Israel. He didn't disappoint with his props, and his message was loud and clear. And our final story today takes us to the United States, to two universities, the University of Columbia and the University of Illinois. Both of them have signed pro-BDS resolutions that support divestment from the State of Israel. The University of Columbia, they managed to pass their resolution during Thursday and Friday. These are high holy days for Jewish students who weren't present, an extreme cowardly act in order to get their resolution to go through. And the University of Illinois also passing a resolution to divest from Israel. Whether or not these will be supported by faculty and leadership, these were certainly put forward by student unions, and one would have to say to them, maybe you need to take a look at what's happening in the region as we continue on our path forward to making peace. So those are the top stories making headlines. Don't forget that you can check out our content online at www.layoftheland.online. You can read a fascinating article by one of the former advisors to President Shimon Peres about will the Palestinians come to the negotiating table. It's up there. It's also up on our Facebook page. Give it a like, give it a share, and don't forget to like us and follow us. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can get your daily edition of the Israel Brief by clicking on the big red subscribe button. And we're also right there on Twitter. You can find us at Lay of the Land with the digit 5. So those are the top stories making headlines. It's been quite a jam-packed edition of the Israel Brief. I'm Rolene Marks. We'll speak again tomorrow. Stay safe and stay healthy.